Hello everyone, Krydax here. Welcome to our intermediate Helmod tutorial. Today we're going to be continuing our previous video on the basics of Helmod, where I talk about kind of how to set it up and how to use it, and we're going to look at some of the more advanced functionalities. So we're going to dive into things like defaults and factory lines and beacons and things like that. So for an example to start with, I've created an acetylene production line. And we're just going to kind of set up some of the ingredients here. We need some calcium carbide, which needs Coke and lime. I'm using Pyanodon's mod packs currently, by the way. And to get Coke, let's say we make it from this recipe. We're going to need lime, which generally you get from Coke and limestone. So we'll just start with this here and kind of go over a couple things. First is the default factory setup. Right here, you can select which building you want to use for your production here. So let's say I want to use gasifier Mark IIs, well, I can select that there. The problem is, next time I want to add something that uses a gasifier, let's say coal, well, let's just say syngas, because I know this uses a gasifier, then it's still going to default to gasifier Mark I. So in most games, eventually you get to a tech level where you're always building the Mark II buildings. So once you are at that tier, you can hit the Set Default button here, and now Gasifier Mark II will be the default building for all recipes that use a gasifier. So if I now try to add syngas, it will default to the red tier building. And that's super helpful once you get, if you're thinking vanilla Factorio, like tier 2 assemblers, for example. And in a lot of mod packs, there's tiers of all buildings. So once you unlock those, you set that as the default. There are also these two buttons: apply the current factory on the production block and apply the current factory on the production line. And once you click that, it will apply whatever building you have selected on all of the different recipes. So if you maybe want to upgrade all of the high pressure furnaces to Mark IV, you can just hit the play button and it will apply it to all of your production block or line without necessarily changing the default forever. And then there's also apply on all categories, apply on the recipe category, and apply with the current module priority. I haven't used these a ton, so I'm not going to go in depth on them because I don't know if I'd be telling you something that's true or not. But what I believe is that if we have different module priorities on different high pressure furnaces, and we only apply with current module priority, then it would only change buildings that have the same module settings. And we'll talk about module priorities in a minute. And I'm not totally sure what recipe category means. I think that has to do with different buildings can make different recipe categories. So, for example, if I hit play here, it's still applied to these two, so they weren't in a different recipe category. I assume recipe category might be referring to which of these menus it's in, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So I don't really use those two very often myself. That would be maybe for an advanced video, which I don't even know if I'm qualified to make. So that's the basics on applying factory defaults. There is a little bit of an interesting deal where, let's say I want a barreling recipe. If I can find one. So let's just say fill acetone barrel. It will default to using the lowest tier of assembling machine that can handle liquids, which is assembling machine 2. So if I set that as default, then when I go to add something that would use an assembling machine, let's just say small parts, I know, use that, then it's not gonna choose assembling machine 2 as the default, because these types of recipes are actually a totally different type because they use liquids, and that might be what recipe category applies to, because if I hit play here, it will change all possible recipes that can use a blue assembler to using a blue assembler. But what's weird is it considers the one with the liquid kind of a different type of recipe than the one without the liquid, and they use the defaults differently. So you'll see this in Bob's mods too. Sometimes different types of recipes can use smelters or things like that. So sometimes you have to make, assembling machine 3 your default more than once, because there's a few different types of recipes that need to be defaulted to assembling machine 3. But that's the basics. So let's move on to beacons. Beacons are pretty scary looking. In certain mod packs, you'll have more than one beacon option, but in Pyanodons, you only have the one beacon, along with vanilla. And so the default and apply on production line, those are all the same concept as what they are up here. So if you want to say, oh, I want to use the super beacon from the creative mod as my default, I'll click that. And then every time I add a recipe, that uses the same kind of category up here, it will use the same beacon, I think. So let's say we have our gasifier, set the super beacon as our default, and then we want to add another syngas recipe. Let's say we use this one. Then it won't default to the beacon because it's tied to the building. But if we add something that uses the gasifier, we didn't actually search for syngas. So if we add one that uses a gasifier, you'll see it will default to the super beacon. So it's tied to kind of the building beacon combo. And then these three numbers, I mean, they kind of are what they say they are, but let me explain them. The amount affecting 1 is how many beacons will actually be like around your factory. So in this case, this factory would have 2 beacons around it. If I added another beacon, then that would be 3 beacons around it. In vanilla, you can get a lot of beacons around one factory. I know space exploration, for example, will only ever allow a maximum of 1 beacon affecting a factory. So if we're back in this menu here, we would say amount affecting 1 factory is 1 beacon. Beacon by factory is the number of beacons per factory. So that changes depending on, your ratio. So, for example, when you're doing space exploration, you can have 1 beacon affecting 8 factories. If you kind of set it up like this, you could even add in a few more. You could have 1 beacon affecting 10 factories. And so the way that you would handle that is you would say amount affecting 1 is 1. So 1 beacon affecting 1 factory, because you can't have more than 1 beacon affecting a factory. And then beacon by factory, let's say you have 8 factories, you'd say 0.125, because that's 1/8 of a beacon per factory. And I believe that affects, how many it tells you need, and then it also tells you how much power the beacons are going to use. So if we actually put some small parts here, then it'll affect how many beacons it says we need. We haven't put any modules yet, so I think that's why it's not applying. And then constant beacon, I usually have 0. I think that has to do with if you're tiling a bunch of designs, you might always have, a few more beacons than you think you need. Because, for example, let's say you have a row of assemblers and you then tile your beacons. You'll notice you have a few extras on the end, right? Because when you're in the middle, each beacon is affecting 4 factories and you have 4 beacons affecting each factory. However, on the end, you have a few extras. Like we have 3 more beacons kind of extra on the end where we stop affecting 4 factories per beacon. So I think that's when you use that constant beacon number. I personally don't really ever use that. That would only be if you wanted to get really specific on large tiled builds. I mainly just set the amount affecting 1 and beacon by factory numbers to be what I want, because that will give you more accurate numbers on how many beacons you need and how much power you need for those beacons. So usually constant beacon I set to 0. And then as always, you can set that as the default, and that will then apply to that building whenever you select recipes that use that building. So now let's get into modules. Modules are a little tricky. Pyanodons has a ton of modules because alien life stuff actually are modules, but we'll just focus on the main three from vanilla right now. You have two modes here, either module selection or module priority. And you have the same settings for both beacons and factories because you can place modules in beacons and factories. So everything I describe works exactly the same for both categories of beacons or factories. It just depends on, do you want to set the defaults for the beacons themselves or what the modules you put in the factories themselves. So usually, you'll do these separately, but I love productivity. So let's say we just want to put as many productivity modules as I can. You can just keep clicking that button until you're full. And it will automatically change all of your different settings to match the appropriate match the appropriate inputs, outputs, speed. You see the number of buildings I need went up because productivity slows things down. If I put speed modules in, you'll see the number of buildings I need goes down. You'll see that power didn't go up by very much, and that's because speed modules, even though they do require more energy, they also make things go faster, and so those two things almost cancel each other out. And then you can see if I add some modules to the beacon, it will also affect those things appropriately. And you'll see I can't add more modules than fit in the beacon, and I can't add productivity. Now this is where the amount affecting one number is pretty important, because if I put 4, you'll see it changes this drastically, because I'm saying I have 4 of these beacons affecting one of these factories. So the number I need for the factories goes way down. So you do want to be careful with the amount affecting one number, because that will change the build itself. Because you're committing to saying, I will have 4 beacons touching every factory in this line. And if you can't commit to that many, then you need to reduce that number, maybe down to 2. And you'll say, okay, if I only have 2 beacons touching every factory, I'll need 4 factories. So that's what that's all about. So I'd say this number is the most important one because it will directly change the actual number of factories it tells you need. The beacon by factory will just change how many beacons it tells you need, which is maybe less important because most players are just like, I'll put how many beacons I need to get the numbers it's already told me. But the amount affecting one, you'll actually build the wrong number of factories if you don't have that right. So, like I said, in space exploration, that's always 1. In other mod packs, you can play with it to be whatever number you prefer. So then we get into the module priority type ideas. So let's say I know I want productivity in everything that it works in. Well, I fill this guy up with productivity, I hit play, and bam, it puts productivity modules in every step. And that's pretty nice. You can also apply it to the whole production line, which would apply to extra blocks that I have here. I would be very careful with applying things to the production line if you have a large production line set up, because it will overwrite everything. You can also just erase all the modules out. A few small details is you can control click on something and it will just add as many as it can for you. And you can mix and match, of course. So I can add 1 speed, 2 efficiency, and a productivity, and then I can hit play on that. And here's where it gets interesting, is it will apply those wishes on every single building. But you'll notice it can't fit the productivity because these gasifiers only have room for 3 modules. So the order that you put the modules in actually matters. If I go 1, 1, 1, and then 2, it will apply in that order again. So it'll try to put 2 speed and then 1 productivity and everything. You'll notice productivity can't go in this one because barreling recipes can't have productivity. So then it goes to the next option, which is the efficiency. Then we get into module priority. This is very useful for mod packs that add extra modules. You can say kind of your default menu that you want to select from. So my default priority is going to be 4 productivity. And then, I guess you have to hit enter, 4 productivity, and then 4 speed in things that can't have productivity. And then if we have more than 4 spaces, we would maybe put 2 energy. And that's option 1. Then you can add option 2, which is maybe the full efficiency package. And then maybe option 3, which is a mixture of speed and efficiency. And then option 4, which would be a mixture of productivity and speed. Something like that. Oops, 2. So then when you're, doing setups later, let's just erase, hit play, remove all the modules. Then you can go over to your module priority menu here and select from your different options. And so I can just hit apply the module priority, and it will take this little setting and bump it up into the building itself. And again, you get to this menu by hitting the little preferences button. Now you can even have your module priority in alternating, like so. So this would try to put 2 productivities in, and then 2 speed modules in, and then if there's still room, it'll put another productivity. So that way you can kind of alternate productivity and speed to make sure you're always balanced somewhat, things like that. The other nice thing about this, which is what I did in space exploration, is I actually just put the modules that I had unlocked, kind of the tiers that I was using, into here, because you don't always have to hit the apply button. You can just select directly from this menu. And so that way you don't have to deal with this huge messy menu, especially in Pyanetons, of all the different possible modules that you could need. You can just go to your module priority menu and just directly select the modules from here. And all the same ideas apply, where you can just control click to add as many speed as possible. So this kind of doubles as both a preset default that you can upload into your building with one click, or it also just doubles as a selection menu, a much more limited selection menu than this. So for mod packs that have a lot of modules, I highly recommend doing a module priority list. For example, in Pyanodons, I will probably make different module priorities with, like, I'll make one for maybe some of the animals, like the augs, I'll put all 4 in there, and then I'll maybe put a different animal. And then that way, when I need to get those animals, I'll have a smaller list to pick from instead of having to find everything in this giant menu. And so obviously for beacons, it's all the same ideas. You can go over to module priority. It shares the same list of priorities, and then you can put those modules in your beacons and impact things from there. So I think that's about it for factory defaults, beacons, and modules. I do want to go over kind of how might you use this. For example, if I actually have modules and beacons unlocked, how do I actually set this up in a way that's valuable? So let me take off all these extras real quick. And what I generally do is I start with, obviously the amount of product I want. Let's say we want 400 acetylene per second. We're doing a lot of mining of lead. You need acetylene to mine lead. And so I start adding in, and let's say we only have tier 2 unlocked. So we'll just kind of apply the tier 2 buildings real quick. And we're adding items, so I need limestone, which comes from these soil extractors, which we'll have tier 2 of. And then we need coal, which we can't mine directly, so we're getting that by doing coal crushing. Now, coal is interesting because it's one of those things where we get it from multiple places. So I might actually add in a new block and switch it to ingredient input. So that way I can say, okay, let's say I want to put in 10 raw coal. This way I don't have to figure out all the crazy percentages. Coarse coal can also be crushed into coal. So from raw coal, there's kind of 3 different things we need to do to get regular coal. But here's the problem. You can't link an ingredient input with a product input. So we know we need 50, and this is where, again, we use math formulas. So I'm getting 15.56, so I divide by 15.56 and multiply by 50. And then sometimes you get a decimal error, so then I'll divide that by 49.99, multiply that by 50, and we'll have exactly an output of 50 without having to figure out what percentage of coal came from this raw coal crushing, what percentage came from crushed coal, what percentage came from coarse coal. Now you can use the matrix solver, but sometimes the matrix solver messes other things up. So this is the workaround if matrix solver isn't something you want to apply on the whole line. Make an ingredient input on a separate block. And now we have our 50 our 50 coal is balancing out, so we don't have to worry about that. The slight negative is that when you use the pin option, it does mess that up. Oh, and I did forget one small detail about beacons. When you use the pin option, and it's showing you your beacons here, you can use the pipette tool to actually place the beacon with the modules already blueprinted in. That's very handy when you have more complicated beacons, for sure. Okay, so back to this setting. What's the purpose of all this? Well, what I like to do is I like to figure out, okay, my beacon's probably always going to be speed. So I'll hit play on that and apply the speed beacons to everything. And then buildings, I generally like productivity. So we'll put productivity in everything. Hit play. The problem is if a building can only handle 2 modules and you hit play, it won't put 3 modules in the buildings that can fit 3. So you kind of have to sometimes find out, like, can I put more? Depending on the mod pack, you'll know how many module slots are in things. It also tells you right here, like this can handle 4. So once you have all this, then you can start playing with the beacons depending on how many buildings you need. So for example, here, I only need half of a high pressure furnace. So I might prefer to actually not use speed modules. And let's say amount affecting 1 is only 2. Depending on how many, let's actually stay with the 4. Like right here, if I take out a speed module, I still only need 1 building. So in this specific block, or I guess recipe within the block, I might actually prefer to have an efficiency and a speed, because then I only need 2.4 megawatts to make all of this lime, rather than, well, it's kind of funny, it says 2.4 megawatts either way. But with larger numbers, obviously that would make a difference to switch out a speed for efficiency. Efficiency modules aren't actually that strong, but when you get into some of the mod packs where they are, let's look at this, for example. Here, we either need 5 gasifiers and 13.7 megawatts, or I can have 7.8 gasifiers, so 8 gasifiers, with a split of efficiency and speed to only need 13 megawatts. Again, in vanilla Factorio, these efficiency modules aren't always the most useful. I'm also just now remembering this constant beacon was part of what's messing me up. Because this constant beacon, you'll notice, changes the power up here on the left. If I change this to 5, oh, now we need a lot more power. So make sure your beacon settings are correct to actually get the correct power usage. So let's say for these gasifiers, I know I'm going to have 2 beacons on every gasifier, and I'll have 2 factories for every beacon, and that'll be kind of the split. Now you can see I would need just over 11, whereas if I have full speed, I'll only need about 8. But the megawatts is 15 versus the megawatts being, well, still 15.6. So you can see it's interesting. I don't actually save power by using efficiency modules because I'll need more beacons. And I'll need more factories running. And so balancing out your power and beacon usage is a pretty interesting game. In vanilla, all of this stuff is not maybe as crazy useful. I mean, I think these numbers are nice to fix, but you only have a couple options for how you put speed or efficiency in. But it's in mods like Space Exploration, when you can put 15 modules in a building, that those settings really become interesting. And in my Space Exploration playthrough in the later episodes, you actually see me kind of doing that in Helmod and playing with, okay, what if I have 6 speed and 7 efficiency? Oh wait, that would mean I need 1 more factory, so I'll reduce the number of speed or efficiency by 1, increase the speed by 1. That gets you kind of down to the number of factories you want. Things like that. So that's it, I think, for the intermediate to advanced Helmod tutorial. If there's anything else you want to see in a much more advanced tutorial, let me know. I think maybe I could do an example build if there's something you'd like to see in a certain mod pack, but I think I've pretty much explained everything that you can do with it. I highly recommend just playing it with yourself. The more you work with this, the more natural it becomes. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.